Yeah, come on. Gotta keep it lively here, right? All right. Thanks, guys. All right. So, I hope you guys, if you caught me earlier, I hope you guys enjoyed that. It was super, super detailed. Did it feel like a fire hose at some points? Like just so much information? You're like, ah. So, first off, I'm going to be talking about some of the same concepts I talked about this morning. I hope that's okay. But we're going to do a couple more examples and we're going to dive in deeper. Because this is where most people mess up in terms of finding deals. So you want to be able to find markets to find deals, right? That's the ultimate purpose, is to find the property. But the problem with the way that people think to find deals is they start looking for properties first, but they're not looking in the right places. I'm a data guy. I started at Citibank in like the equities research market. I'm going to keep that very brief because it's very boring, very corporate. Okay, so very into the details, very into trying to find the data points that make the most sense. And what I have found through researching tons of companies is understanding the market sectors first, which correlates with just finding the right areas first to invest in. And so I'm going to give you guys in detail the steps we talked about earlier, the first two, which is understanding your ROI goals and to be able to find markets. Okay? After this session at 1:45, I'm doing a session over at our booth. I'm doing these some of you have attended those, where they're free. You can just come sit and listen. They're quick, 20 minutes, just straight information. And I'm actually going to lay out at 1:45. Hope it's that session. I don't know. I'm doing a lot. There's schedules all over the place. That session, I'm going to tell you specific markets. The purpose in this one is not to tell you markets. It's to help you, empower you, and give you the confidence you need to know to be able to find the markets on your own. My personal goal isn't to feed you fish. It's to teach you how to fish on your own. So here is my secret recipe. And we're going to go through this step by step by step. And if it seems painful, it's how we do it. It's how you learn how to do this the right way. And I strongly encourage you guys to take notes because I'm going to give you some formulas to calculate cash on cash, cash flow, and some other key metrics that you're going to use. So take pictures, write things down, and just be prepared because I'm going to give you a lot of different little tidbits that you'll use to actually be able to find markets. Okay? This is exactly how I want to preface this. This is huge. Once you walk away from this is your takeaway. You will be able to find profitable STR markets. That is the goal from this session today. Okay? Sound good with you guys? That's why you're here, right? Okay. All right. And then later you can come and you can enjoy the markets I tell everybody else. But the reality is you know how to fish on your own. Okay. So here's the secret recipe that I find right markets for people. So number 1, ROI goals. 2, personal preferences. And 3, key metrics. There's going to be 2 types of metrics I'm going to talk about with finding markets. There's going to be supporting metrics and what I call consequence metrics, meaning because of these certain metrics, like saturation is a really good one. That's a consequence metric, meaning that because we see these certain data points over here, it causes a certain saturation level. Okay? So I'm going to talk about each of those as well so you know how to determine that on your own. All right. Let's first dive into ROI goals. I'm going to float back and forth on a couple things because I realized I didn't arrange my slides the correct way, but it's okay. Oh, there's no back button on this thing. Yikes. That's not good. No. Let's do this. I do want to show something. This slide right here. I want you guys to grab a picture or write this down or whatever. It's not that fancy, but I want you to do this because this is what you need in order to find a particular market or markets. I'm always going to talk about markets. You don't need to look for one market. You need to look for multiple markets. Keep that in mind. Okay, about 5 to 7. So number one, I took, this is from an actual client I consulted with. I sat down with them and I taught them how to do it. So the first thing we see on there is what? Property purpose. What would that mean? So property purpose is the reason why you're buying the short-term rental. And to highlight again what I talked about earlier is if you come to me and you say, well, I want to make money, Kenny, that's great. We all want to make money, right? That's not a real purpose. That's not a real why. I call these milestones, right? So I've talked to a lot of people. Obviously, a big milestone that was for me personally was leaving my W-2 job, making a certain amount of income to hit that. Another type of milestone, a lot of my clients who don't necessarily want to leave their W-2 jobs, is they just want to have income coming in where they could cut back some hours and spend more time with family. Another example is building generational wealth. I hear that all the time. But the question is like, that sounds really cool and like, oh, generational wealth. Yeah, that sounds nice. But it's like, how much? What does generational wealth mean to you? And at what point will you be quote unquote satisfied that you hit that level? What are your actual goals? Okay, so this is really, really important because if you don't know, are you ever going to hit it? No, Kenny. Okay. All right. Getting the same vibes from earlier. All right. I got to start the entertaining process now. Just don't ask me to juggle. So, no, you're not going to hit your goals because you didn't outline anything, right? How much easier is it when you actually see something and you're like, there's the light at the end of the tunnel. Now, here's the beautiful thing about goals, and this is why I call them milestones, is because once you hit it, you can keep going. You can go for the next one and the next one and the next one. So you're never, set a realistic milestone that might be 5 to 7 years out that you think you can obtain. And it could be a wild milestone. I don't care what it is, but set something and then make it numerical. It's got to be a calculation. It's got to be a formula. It's got to be plugged in because this is what's going to help you figure out if a deal is going to be a deal. Because if it doesn't work towards your milestone or your goal, it ain't a deal. It's not right for you. And there are a lot of properties out there, good-looking properties in amazing markets that have amazing amenities and people love them, but they're not right for you. And that's okay. So doing this is going to help you, one, look in the right markets for the right properties, and then two, help you make a logical decision. So property purpose. All right, great. A lot of people kind of daze on that one, but it's like, write that down. That's super important. Number two, we see cash on cash goal or cash on cash return. Then 3 is cash flow. 4, gross revenue. I'll talk about that one in a second. Gross ROI. Purchase price budget, cash on hand. If you're doing a cost segregation, I'll talk about that one in a second. Home base and financing. So this is going to go into personal preferences. So let's talk about how do you determine what your cash on cash or your cash flow goal is in specific detail. I didn't talk about this on stage. I talked about why they're important and which ones you should care about at what stages. But I didn't talk about how you actually calculate it. Because this will depend on your situation. Okay, so first, before we get there, in order to calculate your cash on cash and cash flow goals, you have to know what your purchase price budget is. This is probably the easiest one to figure out. Go talk to a lender, figure out what you're pre-approved for. Done, check mark. Next, you need to understand what your cash on hand is. There are 5 things. Write this down. 5 things that go into every STR investment. And for some reason, people forget. That's why I'm having you write this down. Number 1, your down payment. Number 2, closing costs. Number 3, renovations or updates. Number 4, furnishings, design and decor. And number 5, amenities. Those are the 5 things that go into every STR investment. I'll say it one more time because I'm speaking pretty fast. Down payment, closing costs, renovations and updates, design and decor, and amenities. Those are the 5 things that go. So when you invest into a property, you're going to invest into those 5 things. Now, certain things you might not have to reno, you might not have to do updates, but you're going to invest in other aspects. But those are what go in. So you need to know how much cash you have. When I talk to people and I go, okay, great. What's your pre-approval? Well, I was pre-approved for $900,000. Awesome. How much cash on hand do you have for this investment? $50,000. What? What do you think they're going to get? Do you think they can get a $900,000 home off $50,000 in cash, like just cash on hand? No, that's not possible. So what can they afford? We got to figure that out. So it's based off of your lending. So that's why we got financing piece. If you're doing a second home 10% down, we start doing math backwards. We go, okay, well, look, you got 50K. So if you do 10% down, well, okay, well, now I can afford a $500,000 home. And you're like, yeah, but then you got closing costs, renovations, updates, design and core, and amenities. My rule of thumb, and you'll hear different things, but depending on the purchase price of the asset, if it's over $500,000, you're most likely on design and decor and amenities are going to spend about $10K per room. And that'll cover most of the house. So a 5-bedroom house, you could spend $50,000 to $75,000 or even more on just design and decor alone. So if your budget was only $100K, and let's use this example, so I'm not like just talking out my butt here, but so this guy has cash on hand $75,000. So when we looked at his budget, we're like, look, if you're doing a second home 10% down loan, you're going to spend, and you're going to do, so if it's a $400,000 budget, that's $40,000 plus maybe about $10K in closing costs. And then so that's 50. So now you're left with $25K left for all the other stuff. And yes, sir.
So you talked about the 5. Is there a 6th where let's say it's perfect property ready to go. Do you equate a couple of months just as holding dollars, especially if it's off season, you're buying the property?
That's a great question. Yeah. A safety net. Yeah, safety net. Yeah. So you should 4 to 6. That's the answer. So he's asking about should you have a safety net. So technically, yes, that's not included. But the safety net isn't included in your cash on cash return. Okay. Because you're not investing that into the property, but you do want to have a safety net for that asset. So I love the question. You want about a 4 to 6 month carry cost safety net. So carry cost is your debt service, taxes, utilities, insurance. Just if no one was in the property and it just sat there, what's the base minimum to cover that? You want 4 to 6 months before you buy that property. Okay. So this guy's got 75K. And we determined based on how I broke that down, he could afford up to a $400,000 purchase price. Where's my timer? There it is. Okay. So this is all going to be very, very important in a second when we go to find markets. It's all going to tie in and you guys are going to have an aha moment. At least I hope. If you don't, I'm sorry. But that's the purpose of this. So we now know budget. Now let's move on to, now we know our budget, we can then go to cash flow and cash on cash return. So I talk to people all the time about this. You guys see that number? What's it say for cash on cash? 24%. Well, that's really random. How did we get to 24%? There's a formula to it. There's 2 ways to do it. So, number 1, you either have a cash on cash goal, meaning you want to get your money back as quickly as possible. That's what cash on cash means. Or number 2, you have a cash flow goal, and you want to, for your goal, like if I wanted to quit my W-2, when I wanted to quit my W-2 job, I needed to make a certain amount on a monthly basis. That's a cash flow goal, meaning my profit at the end of all my expenses is X, and it needs to be a certain amount. It's going to be different for every single one of you. So when your purchase price, here's a rule of thumb, and we'll get to the formula. Here's a rule of thumb. If your purchase price is $500,000 or less, you're going to be more focused on cash on cash. If it's more than that, you're probably going to be more focused on cash flow. The example I love to use, if I buy a tent from Walmart or Sportsman's Warehouse for $100 and I set it up in my backyard on Airbnb and I make $1,000 a year, that's a great return, isn't it? $100 tent making $1,000 a year. That's a crazy return. But dealing with guests, cleanings, all the other stuff associated with that, do you think it's worth it for me to do that in my backyard with a tent? No, it's not. So if that's the case, if you're thinking, well, it's not worth it for me either, then you have some sort of cash flow sensitivity. It doesn't matter what the cash on cash return is. You're like, well, yeah, it needs to make a certain amount of money. And this is where we talk about the minimum happiness score, meaning at minimum, the property needs to make this for me to be happy with it, right? I ask people all the time, well, they're like, well, I don't care, Kenny. Great. You're about to buy $1 million property. And would you be happy with $1,000 a year? Well, no, that's not enough. Okay, let's talk more. Like, what else? Well, I'm like, would you be happy with 20,000? Maybe, but that still doesn't seem like quite enough. And then we figure out kind of a number, and then we calculate it backwards. So that's like the cash flow. But the cash on cash return with our cash on hand is how quickly we get our money back. And you can look at this from a payback period. So if you got your money back in 3 years, would you be happy with that? Oh, I'd be really happy. What about 10 years? No, that's too much. 7 years. And you can do the math from there. If you're like, yeah, 5 years, I'm okay with getting my money back at 5 years at the minimum, then what's that? When you do that, that's a 20% cash on cash return. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the minimum target, and then you can work backwards from there. So if I put $75,000 into the deal, and I had a 24% cash on cash return, it's easy to calculate what your cash flow target needs to be, right? So now I can just do the math, go, okay, what's 24% of 75K? It's about $18,000. Boom, there's your cash flow goal. Now you have cash on cash flow. Now we need to work to gross ROI. So gross ROI is the most important metric for finding markets. You should write that down too. But you can only determine it once you know what your gross revenue number is, and you can only determine gross revenue targets from your cash flow goals. So it's all tying in together. So at $18,000 cash flow goal, you take that number and you're going to divide it by 30%. Where's 30% come from? Because 30% of your gross revenue will be your profit on average. Meaning after your debt service, which is about 40%, all your expenses, which could be 35 to 50% or more, you're left with about 30%. For most deals, 30% will be your profit if it's a good deal. But we're basing it off of our numbers here, so it will be a good deal. So if we're taking 30%, so at $18,000, that means this property has to generate a minimum of $60K in gross revenue. So if I'm looking in markets, I have to find properties at a purchase price of $400,000, and they have to generate at least $60,000 in gross income for me, or based on this information here, to be worth it for this investor. You guys connecting the dots there? Anyone not connecting the dots? Okay, it's okay if you don't. I want to help. So you want your ROI, and you can come talk to me later too. So you want your ROI goal, you want to get to a gross ROI, which is gross yearly revenue, so the $60,000 divided by the purchase price, which is $400K, and that gives you 15%. Now you're ready to find markets. So let's get to that. Yes, sir.
This might be in the weeds. Are you including budgeting for maintenance, repairs?
In my pro forma, that's correct. Yeah. So that's a really good question. So he's like, are you including in your budget capital expenditures, so maintenance, repairs, things that pop up? The beautiful thing about the calculation, the formula we just used with the 30%, remember 30% of your gross revenue will be your profit, is that calculation is taking into account all those things that happen with real estate, all the mishaps that happen, right? That's the beauty of that formula, okay? Your gross ROI, rule of thumb, remember this or write it down, your gross ROI should never be below 13%. If that's the case, meaning 13% of the purchase price is the property, the gross ROI, it will not pencil out. It'll be like a break even. So, okay, let's keep moving. So let's talk about how to find actual markets. And I dove into this pretty well, so I'm gonna fly through some of this from the main stage. But what we talked about is, first, you wanna make sure there's active listings, okay? Then you wanna look at affordability. You wanna look at optimal bedroom count, revenue targets, and regulation. So those are the 5 keys to know if a market is investable for you. Grab the picture. So we're moving into each of these, okay? So I'm gonna skip this one because it's like the same thing. All right, so here's how we do it. And once again, I'm gonna fly through this example here because we've got the keys. We know. So when I'm using, this is STR Insights, but you can do this for any market, okay? So in our example earlier, the target was a gross ROI of what? Someone tell me. 15%, okay? So that means that whatever the purchase price is, the revenue has to be 15% of that purchase price. And I need to see multiple properties in that market generating that revenue goal, which was $60,000 in gross revenue. Okay, so we choose a random market. I don't care. This is Luray, Virginia, which is a great market, by the way, and something you can check out. Perfect for someone with a budget of $400,000. You look into the market, and number one, what you're going to do is see what you can afford in that market. So I go into Luray, I put in my budget. That's not arrowed there, but I put it up. And you can put in $400,000, and then properties are going to show up. Then you're going to sort by bedroom count because you need to know what you can afford in that market. Once you do that, so let's use an example. This one, we want to see at least 3 to 5 properties of a particular bedroom count on Zillow to know that there will be options, inventory, right? How many of us have looked in a market and there's like no inventory in that market for short-term rentals? That's pretty common, especially now. It's like frustrating. So we really need to make sure there's inventory, and I want to see 3 to 5. If there's no inventory, should I look in that market? Is that an investable market for me? No. Thank you. So it is not. It's not an investable market. So inventory can be a restriction. All right? So once you do this, you've got this sorted by bedroom. Now you can dive in deeper, understand the regulation of the market. Then we can move to revenue, meaning are there 4-bedroom properties in Luray generating our gross revenue target of $60,000? Okay? And if there are at least 3 to 5 in the market, you can hover over the blue dots in STR Insights and see the revenue number there, thanks to the big red arrow. If there are 3 to 5, we know this market is investable. Now what I want you to do is I want you to find 20 of these markets. So you're going to do this exact exercise, do those 5 steps, and find 20 markets. All right? After that, you're then ready to dive in and try to find the sweet spots, which is what I talked about on stage 2. But I'm stopping right there because I want to sit on this for a second, because finding those 20 markets is actually, this is an easy task to do, right? What I just gave you. Was anybody confused by these steps? Okay. It takes a lot of time to do this. Even like great tools like STR Insights, this is still a tedious process because there are 13,000 markets in the United States, but not all 13,000 are generating the goals you're looking for. And for those of you who've been struggling to find a property recently, you're experiencing that. But the problem is you haven't been applying these steps and you haven't been looking in the right places. So it's really, really important that as you dive into this and follow these steps, that you understand it takes time to do this, but it works. If you spend 3 to 4 hours doing this exercise, you'll find 20 markets. Okay? So let me talk about supporting metrics real quick. There's a lot more to investing in, or what is an investable market, right? We need to make sure there's plenty of demand, the market's not saturated, there's adequate resources and so on. But the reality is these are metrics that come after we study and find the investable markets. So what I mean by that is if I'm looking at a market that has over 100, 500, even 1,000 active listings, there's probably 2 to 3 traffic drivers there, right? So if that's the case, then traffic drivers, you don't need to go hunt for those traffic drivers while you're looking for investable markets. All right? Next point, market saturation. This is a big one. I did a whole workshop yesterday and taught about how to calculate market saturation. If you missed it, come talk to me. You probably missed it because I didn't recognize a lot of faces here. But come talk to me afterwards. I've got like a whole thing on it. I'll teach you how to measure it. But the reality is it's a consequence metric, meaning that if you see properties that you can afford in the market and there are properties generating the revenue in that market, then there's good returns in that market. Therefore, oops, can we go back one? I got a little excited there, I guess. Therefore, the market it's not necessarily saturated. And saturation is also on a bedroom count level, not necessarily a market level. But the reality is it's what I call a supporting metric of an investable market, meaning you don't need to calculate that to know if a market is investable. Third, seasonality. Oh man, what's the occupancy rate in that market? That doesn't matter. If the returns are there, are you there? Like, I'm going to ask you, I'm pointing you. Like when you invest in a property, do you care about the monthly returns or the yearly return? Yearly. Exactly. Everyone would agree, right? Most likely. So if that's the case, seasonality, let's worry about that after we find our list of 20. Finally, proximity. So being near and close to 2 cities, once again, that's going to be reflected by how many active listings are in that market. Well, once again, we're looking for at least 100. And then finally, demand and growth. Once again, reflected by revenue. If the properties are, and most of us are looking for properties that are going to generate 6 figures. If there are multiple properties in that market generating 6 figures, there's obviously demand in that market, right? You can figure that stuff out afterwards, and you will through the process. But finding investable markets, what I'm saying is you don't need to worry about these. Worry about the other 5 steps before. Cool. I'll take questions in a second. But guys, I've made it easy for you too. Here's a free report with the top, there's like 80 markets in here based on budget, destination type, and my top picks across the entire United States. So I didn't want to throw this to you because this is like the answers to the test, right? I want you guys to feel like, but once again, what we talked about at the beginning, I want you guys to feel empowered to be able to know how to fish. I just gave you how I figured out all these markets, but this is the fish. So use this report. It's absolutely free. You can download it. We'll send it to you in an email, and it's nice and pretty. Great. I'm going to move to the last one. So last slide here. I'm going to take some questions here at the end before we go, but I have all these workshops. You don't want to miss any of them because they're all really good, in my opinion. And obviously follow me on social media if you would like more insights into just short reels and content I put out. But let me take some questions. There was a question right here. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, Mike coming. We had one before. I just forgot about it. Sorry.
Thank you. The 3 to 5 homes you're looking to be available on the market, can you speak to how much you're vetting that, or we should be vetting that for short-term use? Like sometimes it's a lot of HOA or things like that. So is it 3 to 5 after considering that, or just 3 to 5 total?
Are you talking about properties for sale?
Yeah. We can do that.
So for the sake of what I want to teach you guys and what I want you guys to do, don't get caught up in that. Don't worry about that. Obviously, that can be a factor, but there can also be a lot of other factors too, and I call those the consequence things, right? So 3 to 5 properties of a specific bedroom count. They don't necessarily have to be actual short-term rentals, but we're just trying to see what the possibility is in that market, okay? So it's a little like, you'll figure it out later, but just finding the right markets, don't worry about that. Yes, sir.
So super rural, I'm Michigan, I'm a Michigan host, and I see super rural properties, and you're not going to find 3 to 5 properties that have a gross ROI or gross ROI number. Is that just scare you off? It sounds like I should probably stay away from that, but I just wanted to get your take on it.
Michigan's got some of the best markets in the country.
Point Falls.
Yeah, Point yeah, there you go. So the reality is like what you define as a market is different.
That's the definition.
It's the region, right?
Yes.
So what you see in STR Insights or any data platform, it's restrictive. So look outside of that if you're in these big regions, and you'll find more comparable properties.
Cool, thank you.
Yep. By the way, pool properties in Michigan, that's where it's at. That's where it's at. I'm not kidding. It's like, I see properties in Michigan, and the numbers are just stupid. Like, it's like not believable. And you're like, what? Like, this can't be right. But it is. And so just something to chew on for the crowd here. Don't tell anybody else in the other rooms, though. They missed out. I'm sorry. But all right, any other questions? Okay, this last one.
Yeah, so how do you guys assess regulations, right? Because that's an easy place to go down a rabbit hole and get stuck.
Okay, yeah, so I guess quick follow-up to that. When you say you get down a rabbit hole and get stuck, how do you get stuck? Tell me more about it.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're coaching is kind of stay at a high level, pick your markets. But I don't want to spend too much time picking a market that I think is not penetrable from a regulations perspective. And you're the first place that I'm seeing any assessment of regulation in a tool. Maybe I'm missing other ones, but so I want to understand how you're gathering that info a bit.
We just had people like pull it and put it together in the tool. But if it's not in the tool, because there's 13,000 markets, I don't know the regulation for all 13,000. So I encourage you, either way, don't rely on what Kenny says or your neighbor down the street about that market for regulation. Call the city, call the county. You need to do that anyway. That's part of due diligence. But do it at the front end. So, yeah. Okay. That's it. Hopefully that was helpful, guys. Hopefully you guys can take away and walk away. That is the purpose of this. But anyway, I look forward to seeing you guys come up, ask me questions. I look forward to seeing you guys at some other little workshops I'm doing. So anyway, have a good one. One second.